Shall join palms. Repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. And keeping the palms joined. Put the palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Good to see you all here. Thanks for being here. Always an adventure to sit and practice and deal with the craziness of our own minds. I think, or I should say, I know, at least for me, Buddhist practice is absolutely the most difficult thing I've ever had to do in my entire life. Like, no question about it. It is the most difficult thing for me that I've ever had to do in my life. That might not be for other people, but I can just share my personal relationship experience with it. It is incredibly challenging. And the interesting thing about that, and I share this, really for those who may be just brand new to Buddhism or newer to it and learning about it, or even as a reminder for those who've been at this stuff for 30 years, is that the reason for me that it's so difficult is because it's the almost absolute opposite of everything I've always thought, done, said, believed my entire life. Completely opposite direction. And I don't know if I would use the word mistake, but I think maybe an unhealthy view that people may often have about Buddhism is that, okay, my life is difficult, challenging, stressful, chaotic, hectic. And so we think that Buddhism is going to be this thing that's going to make everything in your life all of a sudden just really simple and easy. And it, for a while, won't. Because, you ever get angry? How often? Too often, yeah. Too often. Well, okay, go ahead. How often? A couple times a week? That's it? That's phenomenal. So when you say too often, give me a breakdown, like a daily breakdown.
Usually one of my coworkers does something at least once a day.
No, I didn't ask you what your coworker said. I asked you, how often do you?
Usually once a day.
Once a day, usually. All right? It's like coffee,
Yes.
So think about, and anger was the first one that popped up, and I was looking at you when I said it. So think about the emotion of anger, right? And Buddhist practice is trying to figure out, how can I not be angry. So coming here day in and day out, or week in and week out, or year in and year out, doesn't change your dynamic at work with the coworker, right? What has to change in that dynamic is what?
Patience.
Patience and your patience, right? Yes. So that's why this practice is so hard. Because it is outside teachings, meaning teachings that come from elsewhere, that we slowly work to bring into our already existing lives. And the reality is, for the rest of our lives, whether it's daily, whether it's weekly, whatever it might be, we're going to have moments and experiences of anger that may arise. It's just going to happen. And so what it does, that's the opportunity to practice. And that's why it's so difficult. Because we're faced with those opportunities, whether it's every day or a couple times a week, right? We're faced with those opportunities constantly. And so once we begin to understand that whatever is going on in your life is not separate from your relationship to Buddhist practice, then we begin to really get into kind of the depth of what this is about. That says, okay, how do I act with this? And that's why, like I said, for me, it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do, because it requires, and everybody can kind of take this at their own pace and at their own, their own pace, however you want to roll it into your life. But it requires you to very honestly look at yourself and say, like, wow, where's my anger? Where's my greed? Where's my ignorance? All these causes of suffering that we always talk about. And you have to be honest with that. And that's also not that fun. Right? So I think that, and to kind of wrap up this thought, once we remove this idea that Buddhism is something that is outside of our daily lives, we can see how this might make a difference. And then it becomes lots of fun, because then you get to explore the craziness in your own mind and your own heart, but with like a gentleness to it, as opposed to like an attacking, critiquing mode to it. And that's where it becomes fun. That's where it becomes pleasurable. That's where it becomes joyful. To like kind of laugh at your own anger. Like, wow, I'm really angry. Like, how ridiculous is that? And are most of the things you get angry at, are they really worth being angry over? I mean, some of them, I'm sure, but are most of them? No. But in the moment, it's like end of the world, So, all right. So with that, we'll start a meditation practice. And all of our YouTube followers, good evening. Thank you for being here. Feel free to say hello, introduce yourself. There's a chat box on the screen somewhere. And we'll start with a meditation practice. For those who are sitting maybe for the first time, a couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you, right? You're not going to float away. Mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long, it's not going to shut off. Don't judge this. We're just going to sit, we're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside the room, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all the chaos. So posture, you want to be comfortable. If you are on a cushion, often it helps sliding to the front third. Pushing the stomach forward allows the back to straighten. Shoulders are relaxed. Hands can be on the knees or in the lap. If you're on a bench or a chair, same thing. Also just sitting up straight. Shoulders are relaxed. I'll guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. Expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Where's your mind? Lost in thought? Return to breath. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgment from the practice. Just sitting, breathing. keeping the mind alert. Aware of each sound. Each thought. Each physical sensation. Yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. No one else to be. everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. As you slowly open the eyes, slowly beginning to move. Most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, it's nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It's everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada. It means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means very simply for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens. More reactions. That's what we get. This practice is learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to everything else that's happening throughout your days. And so all we're working on is closing the gap, or the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. This practice is not easy. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. It's direct perception into the present moment. And very often throughout our lives, that present moment is incredibly difficult and painful and traumatic. And very often the present moment is pleasant and joyful and calm. And that's our whole life. It's just an endless range of experiences. And this practice is recognizing, what does our mind, what does our heart do with each experience? Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything and everyone around us, and we work on changing our mind and our reaction to the world around us, life gets us a little simpler. In reality, not much change except us. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's just becoming aware of your own karma, your own thoughts, your own words, your own actions, and how your thoughts and your words and your actions play out in your life. And that just repeats over and over and over again. And that's why, again, at the beginning, for me talking about why Buddhist practice is absolutely been the most difficult thing I've ever had to do in my entire life, is because it doesn't stop. When you engage in this practice wholeheartedly, it's not just a thing. It becomes a practice in every moment. And in every moment, sometimes the practice is really simple. Right? If people are being nice to you, is it easy to not get angry? If people are being mean to you, is it easy to get angry? Right? Are you going to go through your life and have some people be nice to you? And are you going to go through your life and have some people be mean to you? So there lies the beauty of this lifelong practice. And once we open up to that, then we realize we are in absolute, in an opportunity, I should say, to be mindful of our thoughts. So with that, I'll pause. For me, I'd always really just prefer to respond to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything that you're sitting with. We'll use the rest of our brief time this evening. And again, I'll respond to your thoughts or questions. To all of you, again, joining us on YouTube, welcome. Good to see you all. If you have questions as well, feel free to type them in here. Yeah, sorry.
So a friend of mine showed interest in Buddhism, and he asked me the question, is it possible to never get reborn as a human on the human plane? And what would be the correct answer to that? Not even just like factually answering this question, but how to think about it, because it struck me as a somewhat, I know that it's very rare to be human, but it struck me as a weird question.
Well, so here's the thing, just to try to, I just want to repeat it for those joining virtually who might not have heard it, but to paraphrase, and correct me if I'm way off base here, but your question is, a friend of you is maybe interested or starting to get interested in Buddhism and asked you the question, is it possible to be reborn other than a human?
Never reborn.
Never be reborn as a human.
Yes.
And then you went on to say that it's very rare to be reborn as a human, but how do you respond?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So the simple answer is what I would absolutely discourage you from responding with to your friend. So in Buddhism, there's a word called upaya, or payak as a verb. It means skillful means. And with Buddhist teachings, I'll just touch on this briefly and then get directly to your question. With Buddhist teachings and practice and introducing it, sharing it, all these types of things, skillful means is incredibly important. When you have a friend who's interested in Buddhism, and you yourself are interested in it, and you've read it for a while, and it's becoming more and more a part of your life, the last place you want to start a conversation with somebody around Buddhism is the topic of rebirth.
In my defense, he brought up rebirth.
Right. No, I'm not, this is for everybody. So I'm sure you didn't walk right into this, right? But I just want to put that out on the table for everybody. The simple answer is yes. Right? You could just be like, yes, give your friend a high five and walk away and leave it at that. But that's not going to go over so well, right? But let me touch on that a little bit as well. So a lot of different ways to kind of explain this, but in Buddhism, and these aren't things that like the Buddha invented, and this is important for everybody to understand, right? You're talking 2,500 years ago in India. You're talking to Hindu, for the most part, religion, views of life, views of rebirth, all these types of things, Indian cosmology. The view then was that rebirth or reincarnation or continuation of consciousness is what everybody believed in. That's just what they thought. If you told somebody then that you got one life and you're going to heaven or hell, they would have thought you were crazy. Now you go up to the average person today and be like, you're going to be reborn. They think you're crazy. And very often people who don't know anything about Buddhism and get kind of intrigued by it, they do jump there. There's some Buddhist thing that said like, oh, you get to be reborn. So they're like, well, what's all this rebirth stuff, right? That's where you're never going to win this dialogue, or not win it, but you're going to always have difficulty with it. But I'll get to that part in a second. So the Buddha didn't invent this rebirth stuff. It was already there. It's what everybody believed. And there were all different realms of rebirth, right? So just like in a Western context where we have heaven and hell and things like that, Buddhism has the same thing. There are hell realms. There are animal realms. There are human realms. There are heavenly realms. There are God realms. There are endless, and within those major 6 realms, really, I believe, there are then those realms, like hell realms has like 28 realms within the hell realms, right? You don't want to go to any of them, put it that way, right? But so all of that stuff exists in Buddhism back then from India, no different than how the views are now of heaven and hell and things like that. They existed then, they exist now. And your actions, your karma, it's called alaya vijnana, your storehouse consciousness, your accumulation of karma and actions determines your rebirth. So the question very directly of can one be reborn or no longer be reborn as a human? Absolutely. And that's what's called parinirvana. And that's what, when the Buddha died, right? And it said at birth, he spoke, and again, these are stories. It said that stories, when the Buddha was born, it said that he took, I think, 7 steps. And as he took 7 steps at birth, because I'm sure when you were born, you could take 7 steps, right? Maybe only 5, right? But he took 7 steps, and as the Buddha took 7 steps, lotus flowers blossomed under each one of his feet. Stories, okay? And it is said that he said, "This is my last rebirth." And then it's said that when he died, he entered into what's called parinirvana, meaning nirvana, to extinguish, with no remainder, not coming back, no rebirth. technically it's taught that he neutralized his karma. No positive karma, no negative karma, just straight neutralized. Meaning no karma generated from the body, no karma generated from the speech, no karma generated from the mind. These are the three ways we generate karma: thoughts, words, and actions. So the Buddha, it said when he died, neutralize that, no more rebirth. So your simple answer is, yeah, the Buddha did it, but then good luck with the next 17 questions that follow that, right? So my suggestion always for you or anybody is when people kind of jump to the rebirth stuff, and when it comes up here, which it does every so often, I'm always happy to address it and share it and things like that, what I've learned. But I still am not a big fan of even focusing on that. Because what matters is not what happens when we die. What matters is what?
This one.
What happens now? What are we doing now? And for those who like get into Buddhism and get into meditation, but just have like ridiculous, absolute barriers or just the lack of any interest whatsoever in rebirth, phenomenal. You don't have to have any interest in rebirth or even any belief in it whatsoever, right? It's completely irrelevant. What matters is what are we doing right now? But even if you do, if you're someone who believes in Western religion, you grew up believing in heaven or hell, for the most part, what determines if you get into heaven? Huh?
Karma.
Forget the fancy Buddhist words. What determines if you get into heaven? Forget the Buddhist terms.
Peace is not a Buddhist term.
You're translating karma.
Being a good person.
Being a good person. Ask.
Faith.
Thanks. Say again?
Faith.
And faith. That's why I said for the most part, because there's always that part, right? There's the faith. So faith is incredibly important in Western religions, right? Which also doesn't even necessarily mean you have to be a good person. You could be a terrible person, and I don't get into comparative religious stuff. I'm a Jewish kid who was a terrible Jew and got into Buddhism, so I couldn't even have comparative religious stuff. I got invited one time years ago to a church. I actually do a lot of interfaith stuff, and myself and the reverend of like 30 years, our dialogue was on the Thich Nhat Hanh text, Living Buddha, Living Christ. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so the wrong person to be sitting here right now, right? But yes, and that came up a lot there, that you could be a person who does so many terrible things, right? But if you have faith, boom, right? You're good to go. So when I say for the most part, that's always what I'm referring to. Is that, but aside from faith, right, what determines where you go? What we do. Right? And so with Buddhism, it's the same thing. The focus is on what do you do? What do you think? What do you say? And what do you do? That's the important part, not the whole rebirth part. You know? Yeah.
So that makes me think of a question, I guess, which is, has Buddhist philosophy or has the religion changed then over time? Like, did that used to be a more prominent feature? Because my first book that I read was The Heart of the Buddha by Thich Nhat Hanh, and I don't really even remember him talking. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot that I need to go back and read, but I don't really remember that being a focus. That's just not what stood out to me. Has it changed over time?
Correct. So again, the question was, has Buddhism changed over time with regards to teachings on rebirth? The Heart of the Buddha that you read from Thich Nhat Hanh really doesn't get into rebirth, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't say that Buddhist teachings has changed over time. Well, the Buddha's teachings has not changed. He taught 2,500 years ago for 45 years and then he died. So we can't go back, obviously, and rewrite and change what he taught or what he said. But again, going back to my Upayic word, what happens is people like Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a brilliant teacher in the Western culture at engaging Western folks in Buddhism, understood that he's teaching to a society of people that grew up for the most part believing in heaven or hell and didn't grow up believing in rebirth. And if all of a sudden he sits down and he starts teaching rebirth, people are like, peace out, yo, see ya. It's just not going to fly so much. So it's not necessary, I find, in many teachings today, and many Western Buddhist teachers do not teach it. For those exact, that's my opinion, for many, for not those exact reasons, but for many different reasons around the potential turning off people to Buddhist teachings because they're too focused on rebirth. But since you asked that question, what I personally is that, and I'm contradicting myself as well here, I think it's a mistake to not teach it. And here's why, right? So let's just say we all did believe in rebirth as a, wouldn't you possibly change what you did every day? If you knew that you were going to be reborn, just hypothetically, as a human, and you had to go through this pain and suffering and misery, life after life after life, and you knew that you could eliminate that or remove that misery and pain and suffering life after life, wouldn't you possibly change your actions? Possibly? Just a thought. Absolutely. So it doesn't intellectually, conceptually, even scientifically, for me personally as a practitioner, rebirth makes no sense. But I look at the body of Buddhist teachings and 95% of it, I'm like, this dude was a brilliant human. And I'm all in on 95%. The 5% here that doesn't make sense to me, I'm like, I'm gonna go all in anyways, right? So in my own personal life, I think of rebirth as a major driving force in my practice. And look at it this way. If we think of like the challenges and the difficulties that we have all had to face in this life, look at all the trauma, all the pain, all the suffering that we have engaged in this life from the technical Buddhist teachings, right? Where does all that come from?
Our minds.
Yes, but what in this context, past lives. The mistake we all make is we sit here thinking like, am I, Jeff, going to be reborn? And what am I going to be reborn as? Yet, Jeff, the consciousness of Jeff in this physical form that was just given a name by people I call my parents, I'm sitting with all my past lives and karma right here in this very moment. There's a great teaching that says, if you want to understand your past karma, look at your present moment. You want to understand your future karma, look at your present moment. There was a master in Taiwan. He taught life and death studies for many years. And he gave a great teaching talk one time about the mistake that people make with this idea of rebirth is that we think of this physical form that we're in right now as one life. We associate life with physical body. But what he taught is that it's just one endless continuation of consciousness that goes from physical form to physical form to physical form, which we call this life. But if you remove the attachment and the view of life after life after life, and you just see it as one endless stream of consciousness that is simply being housed by these physical shells, it made sense to me. I mean, not that I could like scientifically explain it, but theoretically it made sense. So glad I clarified all that stuff. Other thoughts or questions? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of the pillars of what makes good karma?
Yes. So the question is, can I talk a little bit about the pillars of what makes good karma? Yeah? Okay. Good question. I mean, all good questions, but think about anytime. Well, let me back up for a second. Do you know what the word karma means? What do you think karma is?
Sort of a collection of all of your energy? I have no idea.
That's great. What I was getting at is a lot of people will often say that karma, not necessarily you, but anybody else that might be new, often people think karma is what goes around comes around, or doing to, what you do comes back. Karma is not what we get. Karma is about what we give. and this is kind of getting to your question, but I just want to start with this explanation. The word karma literally translates to action. And so the Buddha taught that we generate karma, we generate action. Our deeds is what we think, what we say, and what we do. These are the three ways we generate karma: body, speech, mind, thoughts, words, and physical actions. So your question, let me give you one more example. Think of a cue ball when you're playing pool, right? You have the white ball there, you hit it into the rack, and every time you hit it into the rack, every ball goes into a different direction, right? So our entire lives, we are that cue ball. What that means is every person, place, and thing we encounter, we have an impact with or on. And so there's a kind of a phrase in Buddhism that says, be mindful of your karma. Meaning, if I run up to you and I start screaming and yelling at you, there's a chance you're going to scream and yell back at me. If I run up to you and I give you a hug, there's a chance you might give me a hug back. I mean, maybe you punch me, who knows? But so we're mindful of what we do, knowing that that's going to have an impact. So, which really ties into your question of, okay, well, what are the pillars of these three: body, speech, and mind, right? And as you may even see on t-shirts, think good thoughts, speak good words, do good deeds. But then the question is, well, what is good, right? Anytime you look at karma, thoughts, words, and actions, you have to look at your intention. It is broken down pretty clearly, and I'll talk about this in a minute, Buddhist teachings within all three of these. But in a general rule of thumb, think about, what's my intention? Now, when you do something that you know is all about feeding your pride and your ego, are you typically aware of that? And so your intention would be to please whom? Self. And these things aren't about being right or wrong or good or bad. When I break this down, this is not meant for you then to like critique or judge yourself and be like, oh, I'm a bad Buddhist, I'm a bad person. It's just an awareness that so much of our day, our intention is about what's for me. And so in that regard, your intention is driven by yourself, your ego, your cravings, your desires. And that's what the Buddha said leads to suffering. Now, I'm sure you've also done many wonderful, kind things for people in your life. And when you do those things, where's your intention? Who's it all about? Everyone else, right? That's a really great place to start. As far as the pillar you're looking for, first start with, what's my intention? Now, breaking down the three, when you look at your thoughts, okay, always start with intention of, is what I'm thinking beneficial to self and others or harmful to self and others? I'm just trying to simplify it. And I think with thoughts, that's a great place to start. Is this thought beneficial, healthy, right? You could use, I think healthy is a good word, but is it healthy or beneficial for me and others? Not in a selfish, greedy way, but is this a healthy, pleasant thought for myself and for others? Or is it not? Okay? For speech, there are very specific teachings around speech karma. Is it honest? Is it necessary? Is it timely? Right? Does it need to be said? Gossip, slander, these are things that the Buddha said very clearly. Don't gossip, don't slander. Right? Also, you can start with intention with this also. But I think for a pillar of speech karma, look at, is it honest? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Right? And then the physical karma, when I think of like physical karma moving through the world, how do we impact our environment? How do we impact the places we live? How do we impact with the cars we drive? How do we impact the places we go to? How do we physically engage in the world? And then we can ask ourselves with these kind of examples, am I causing harm or not? So it's not like the Buddha had some secret esoteric teaching 2,500 years ago. They're pretty much the same thing that most of us learned when we were 5 years old, right? Be kind, don't harm, right? Is that helpful? Yeah.
What about if someone's intent was good, but then they actually did something bad?
If say that again, if their intent is
So,
good.
like, their intent is positive, like they think it's gonna be helpful, but then it's not.
Yeah. Happens all the time.
Right.
And okay, so let me ask you this. When you say, what about it?
Well, like, how does that work for karma?
Yeah. My first suggestion is, and this is for all of us really, is even though I kind of broke it down as like stages of karma or levels of karma, I wouldn't try to, for lack of better expression, like try not to grade your own karma. You know what I mean? Try not to get into like, is my karma an A+ today, or is it like a D- today? Right? Start there. The second thing is, we don't always know the impact of what we think, say, and do is going to have on anybody else. Actually, let me rephrase that. We never know what we think, say, and do, how that's going to impact somebody else. So what we do with our intention, our karma stops there. What I'm hearing in the question is, if our intention is, say, pure or good, but it's received in not that manner, and that leads, individuals or groups or whatever to respond negatively to our intention, that's their karma. Our karma doesn't get handed off to them. Our karma is not contingent upon somebody else's actions based on our intention. Does that make sense? Our intention could be beautiful or wonderful. The result, maybe not so much. But that's what their karma chose to do or how to respond to our intention. Yeah? And I'll close with this thought. The hardest part with that is, and I don't know everybody here, so when I say things like we all do this, I don't really know what you all do, but I'm just making the assumption that we all, at times in our lives, think, say, and do things, and then other people respond certain ways, and then we carry that with us. Our thoughts, words, and actions have an impact, just like the cue ball, right? But once the cue ball hits the rack, that rack is on its own. That's their karma. And the danger is we then will spend so much of our lives judging, critiquing ourselves based on what we brought into a situation. And we don't know anybody else's karma, no matter how much we want to or think we do. We don't know what karma they came in with, what karma they've cultivated throughout this life. And we just don't know. Does that make sense? Yeah. What I'm trying to do, one sec. I just want to finish this thought and say it like 8 different ways, hoping that it hits people 8 different ways, because I think this is really important for all of us, is that there's probably things that all of us in this room carry with us that we feel responsible for. And that's an incredibly deep burden that every human, I believe, should be liberated from. Meaning, we brought our best intention, back to your question, into a situation. And it doesn't always work out that way. But that doesn't mean that we must carry that burden in our hearts and our minds the rest of our lives, because that'll destroy us. Yeah, and we'll close.
I can't remember who, but I seem to recall reading a lot about like the power of inaction, or at least heavily considered action in Buddhism, because you don't know where your karma is gonna go. But
when you say power of inaction, meaning stillness, because you don't know what you're gonna create
like even
out there.
good intention, the road, saying the road to hell is paved in good intentions, right? So a lot of times your good intention is in somebody else's like good outcome.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I can't remember who I read from that, but I think it was maybe a Korean Buddhist. But either way, short story long, like I just wanted to mention that because there's a lot of people that I think it's part of Praditya Samapata. You keep thinking you need to create action to get it, but really the best thing a lot of times is just stillness.
Right. Well, yes, and that's so. If you think about it, to wrap up here, when the Buddha awakened, right, when he became the enlightened one, as they called him, what he did was, at that moment, after 21 days of sitting under the Bodhi tree, is this neutralizing of karma comes from, is he stilled the body. He just sat perfectly still. He stilled his speech. He was silent. And he stilled the mind. Nothing could disturb him. He's challenged by Mara, right? All the arrows thrown at him, the hail, the thunderstorm, the beautiful women dancing in front of him. Mara, his mind challenged him. And he was never shaken. So ultimately, and whatever you read is probably referencing something from this teaching of the Buddha, that yes, it was the stillness of the body, speech, and mind that led to his awakening. The question is for us, are you going to spend the rest of your life not moving, not speaking, and not thinking? Yeah, so that's where, yes, I agree with what the fumbled through explanation, whatever you read however long ago, I agree with it probably. But now what? Yeah. So, but again, that's why it is important to spend time in silence. It is important to spend time in stillness. It is important to work on, the concentration in the present moment. All those things are deeply, deeply important. But knowing that then we get off the cushion or off the chair and we go into our lives. And that's where we're screwed. So, or not. So, all right, I'm going to close on that. We'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to more than 6 million lives that have been lost during this pandemic, their family and friends who still suffer during this time, to all of those in Ukraine and surrounding areas who suffer and have lost lives, to those in Texas, Chicago, who lost lives, the children and adults, and all of us who are in pain. May we all be free from pain and at peace. All right, thank you all. Before you head out, our rock star Dharma Bum volunteer host Carly's going to share a few announcements with us.
Hi everyone. I'm tonight's Dharma Bum host, which you can see by my laminated badge, Carly. We opened the Dharma Bum Temple 15 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and are not looking for students. They are simply practitioners sharing their interpretation of the practice with others. Just about every night we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery Sangha that meets several times a week for anyone battling addiction, drugs, alcohol, or anything for that matter. A family Sangha for parents, kids, toddlers, and teens, which currently meets once a month. We also offer a half-day silent retreat the first Saturday of the month with an RSVP required. Everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and also posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. When you pick a night, make sure you check to see if there's RSVPs required, because some nights are and some nights aren't. We also have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it and then bring it back whenever you're done with it. And I also like to add additional donations of Buddhist books that you like, if you want to drop those off, because I really, really like seeing new stuff come through. That's just for me. I'm thinking to myself. As we leave, if you can straighten your seat or cushion before you head out, and if you guys can close the side windows if you're near one, that'll get us tidied up and out of here sooner tonight. And again, thank you for being here. We wish you well, and we really do hope to see you again.
Thanks, Carly. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.